Hi and welcome. You are listening to Listen and Relax. Sit back and enjoy these 7 ghost stories that I will narrate for you. If you want us to continue making these videos, please let us know in the comments what you think about the stories and if we should continue. Please like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated when we post new exciting stories. It was about 11 years ago, but the memory still haunts me. I was 16 at the time, and I worked as a hostess at a local steakhouse. My shifts usually ended around 10 p.m., and that night was no different. I remember pulling into my driveway, tired from a long day, and feeling ready to finally unwind. But something about that night fell off from the moment I stepped out of my car. My mom's car wasn't in the driveway, but my dad's truck was. The house was completely dark, which wasn't unusual. My dad sometimes liked to sleep with the lights off. But what caught my attention was how quiet everything was. Normally, when I got home, the house was filled with the sound of our 3 chihuahuas yapping, running around, and just being their usual hyperactive selves. But tonight, nothing. I opened the front door and immediately noticed the dogs. All 3 of them were sitting together in the front room, right by the door where I had just walked in. That wasn't typical either. These dogs were always on the move, following me or my parents around wherever we went. But they were sitting still, just staring at me, almost as if they were waiting for something. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe they were tired, or maybe they were waiting for my mom to get home. But as I walked into the house, something else caught my attention. The door that separated the kitchen, dining room, and the main living room was closed. Now, my dad would sometimes do that if he was sleeping on the couch. He'd close the door to keep the dogs from bothering him. It wasn't unusual for him to nap there after a long day. So I pushed open the door and walked into the kitchen. The dogs stopped in their tracks, refusing to follow me into the kitchen. They stayed by the door, just watching. It was strange. They always followed me around, even if I was just getting something to eat. But tonight they wouldn't budge. I didn't want to disturb my dad, who I assumed was asleep on the couch, so I didn't turn on the kitchen lights. I relied on the dim light coming from the hallway to guide me as I pulled out a plate of food. As I stood there, I heard something, a faint squeak. It was the sound of the couch. I recognized it immediately. My dad's couch was old, and whenever he shifted his weight or rolled over, it made this distinct squeaking noise. I figured he was just adjusting to get more comfortable. I quickly grabbed my food, not wanting to wake him up, and returned to the front living room. The dogs followed me this time, jumping up on the couch and sitting next to me as I ate. I turned on the TV and tried to relax, but something was still off. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up for no reason, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When I finished eating, I decided to clean up and put my plate in the dishwasher. As I walked back into the kitchen, I glanced up at the back door, and that's when I froze. The door was wide open. This door was right in front of the kitchen counter, and when I walked in earlier, it had definitely been closed. I felt a chill run down my spine. My heart started pounding in my chest as I turned around and looked at the couch. And that's when I realized something even more terrifying. My dad wasn't on the couch. I called out, "Dad?" No response. My heart was racing now. I called out again, this time louder, "Dad?" But still, nothing. Panic started to set in. I rushed to the phone and called my mom. My voice was shaking as I asked, "Mom, where are you?" Her response made my blood run cold. She told me that she, my siblings, and my dad were all at my aunt's house for a barbecue. They hadn't been home all evening. I stood there in the dark kitchen, the weight of her words sinking in. I was completely alone. The back door was wide open. My dad's truck was in the driveway, but he wasn't here. There was no explanation for it. To this day, I have no idea who or what was in my house that night. Who opened the back door? Who was I hearing move on the couch? Was I being watched the entire time? I often find myself thinking about it, wondering what could have happened if I'd looked at the couch the moment I walked into the house instead of waiting. That experience was only one of several strange occurrences I had in that house, but it remains the most chilling. I still get the creeps every time I think about it. It's a story I'll never forget. Here's a story I've been meaning to share, one that's been on my mind for years. It happened when I was around 7 or 8 years old, and I still think about it all the time. At that time, I lived with my grandma in a small gated neighborhood. It was a quiet place with a handful of houses, and everyone knew each other. The people there were all really nice, and me, my sister, and my best friend were pretty much the only kids in the area. So we all became close friends and spent every bit of free time together. One summer, we decided to do something we had never done before, a sleepover. It was a big deal at the time, and everyone was excited about it. My grandparents were okay with it, and my friend's parents agreed too. My sister decided not to join us, though. She had a huge crush on my friend and didn't want to spend the night with us for some reason. So it was just me and him. The evening kicked off around 4 p.m. We played video games for a while, then had dinner. Afterward, we watched YouTube videos just hanging out and having fun. But when it got late, things started to get weird. Now, it's important to know that I've always had trouble sleeping. I've dealt with insomnia and sleep paralysis for as long as I can remember. So I tend to wake up a lot during the night, tossing and turning, getting up for water, or just moving around. My friend, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. He could sleep through anything, no matter the conditions, no matter the noise. Nothing ever seemed to bother him. That night, I kept waking up. I'd toss and turn, and at one point, I woke up feeling really cold, even though I had my blankets on. I glanced around the room, trying to get my bearings, and that's when I noticed something odd. My friend was sitting up in bed, staring at the wall. I asked him what was going on, and he shushed me, whispering, "Be quiet, you're going to wake them." I figured he meant his parents, and I thought maybe he was doing something he wasn't supposed to do, so he didn't want to wake them up. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. But a little while later, I woke up again. And again, he was sitting up, staring at the wall. Sure, he told me again, don't wake them. This kept happening throughout the night, me waking up, seeing him sitting up, and him telling me to be quiet. I had no real sense of time back then, so I didn't know if this was happening in the span of a few minutes or a few hours. But each time he would say the same thing. Sure, you're going to wake them. Then I woke up suddenly with a sharp feeling that something was wrong. I was sweating, but at the same time, I was shivering. It was a deep, unsettling feeling in my gut. Something told me not to open my eyes, just to go back to sleep, pretend like everything was normal. But my curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't help it. I opened my eyes, and that's when I saw him. He was standing directly above me, staring down at me. His face was right there, so close that I could see his eyes, but something was off about them. They looked like his eyes, but they weren't. They didn't feel like they belonged to him. There was something wrong, something strange and unsettling in them that made my heart race. I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he just stared at me unblinking. Then, in the eeriest voice, he whispered, "Awake." I thought maybe he meant his parents were awake, so I asked, "Are they mad?" Without hesitation, he replied, "Yes, very, very mad." The moment he finished speaking, I felt something hit my face. Water. I wiped my face off, trying to process what was happening. And then I stood up to get a better look at him. That's when I saw that he was crying. Tears were streaming down his face, and it freaked me out more than anything else. I didn't know what to do. I had never seen him cry like that before, and I felt completely helpless. I just stood there, staring at him, not knowing what to say. "They took me away," he said in a whisper, barely audible. After that, I didn't know how to react. I was completely lost. I just went to the bathroom to try and collect myself. When I came back, he was lying back down in bed, looking completely normal. So I climbed back into bed too, trying to shake off the weird feeling that had taken over me. Somehow, I managed to fall asleep again. The next morning, we went to the public pool, and I decided I had to confront him about what happened. I asked him if he remembered anything from the night before. He looked at me, puzzled, and told me he had no memory of what I was talking about. He thought I was joking or making it up. But I wasn't. I knew what I saw. I knew what happened. And to this day, I can't explain it. The thing that sticks with me the most is how he didn't remember any of it. It's like it wasn't him that night, or maybe it was him, but something else was controlling him. I don't know what was going on, but whatever it was, it felt wrong. I'll never forget that sleepover. I still wonder what happened to him that night. Why was he crying? Why didn't he remember? And who, or what, was he trying to warn me about? I have a story that I still find hard to wrap my head around. It's something that happened recently, something that felt so real, so personal that I feel like I need to share it, even if it sounds strange or hard to believe. In late 2019, my mother passed away. We were incredibly close, and her loss was one of the most painful things I've ever gone through. It's been years now, but there isn't a day that goes by without me thinking about her, wondering what she would say if she could see me now, especially with all the mistakes I've made since her passing. The truth is, I've struggled with alcoholism for a long time. I'm not talking about an occasional drink here and there. I'm talking about being an active alcoholic. I drink about a liter or more of hard liquor every day. I've thrown up countless times from overdrinking. I've lost most of my friends and family because of it. There have been times when I've been institutionalized because of my drinking, and I've hurt myself in ways that I still can't fully understand. But in November of last year, something happened that made me stop and think. It started in the early morning, around 9 a.m., roughly the time when my mother passed away. I was having bizarre dreams. Now, I know dreams can be strange, and we all have those weird, disjointed dreams that make no sense. But these dreams were different. They weren't just odd, they were unnerving. In each dream, something would happen, and then suddenly, the dream would stop. And in that stillness, the character in the dream would repeat a name. It wasn't just once, it was repeated over and over. It sounded like Orlo at first, but it would change slightly each time. Orlov, Orlok, Orlos. The name would echo through my dreams, and I had no idea what it meant. Then, after the name was repeated, the person in the dream would turn to me and say, "Have you told them? Tell them." The message didn't make sense at first. I couldn't understand why this was happening, or who them was. But as I lay there in the half-light of that early morning, something clicked in my mind. It was her, my mother. Somehow, I knew deep down that this was her way of reaching out to me, of telling me something. I knew what she would say if she were here now. Go get help. Seek recovery. Don't keep destroying yourself. It was as if she was guiding me, even from beyond the grave. So I did something I had never been able to do before. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. It felt like a huge step, but I knew it was the right one. And that's when something else strange happened. At one of the meetings, there was a speaker holding a book. When I looked at it, I saw the name Orloff on the cover. The moment I saw that name, a chill ran down my spine. I knew without a doubt that it was a sign, that the dream, the name, everything was a message from my mother, telling me I needed to be there, to face my struggles, and to share them with others who understood. It felt like she was giving me the push I needed to finally confront my addiction and seek help. That moment was life-changing. For years, I had wondered what my mother would think of me now, what she would say if she could see the person I had become. And in that instant, I had my answer. She wasn't angry with me. She wasn't disappointed. She just wanted me to get help, to save myself before it was too late. I believe that sometimes our loved ones don't leave us entirely. They can find ways to reach out, to guide us, even after they've passed on. If you ever feel like you're being nudged by a message, whether it's from a dream, a thought, or a feeling, sometimes it's worth listening. Those messages might be exactly what you need to hear, even if they don't always make sense at first. Thanks for reading my story. I'm still working through my recovery, but that dream, that message from my mother, is something I'll never forget. It changed everything for me. This is a story I've been meaning to share for a while, and while it might sound a little strange, I promise you it's a true one. For the sake of anonymity, I'll change the names and places, but everything else really did happen. Let me start by telling you a little about my boyfriend, John. Now, I wouldn't call him psychic or medium, but he and some of his family members have this strange ability to feel energies, presences, if you will. It's not something anyone else can see or hear, but they can sense it. It was something I first noticed when we moved into our first apartment, an old place that seemed to have a lot of, well, energy. John would sometimes feel things in the apartment, odd, unexplainable feelings that made him uneasy. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat myself, so I quickly told him to save the ghost stories and paranormal experiences for after we moved out of there. He was kind enough to honor that, but after we moved, he started telling me the details of what he had sensed, and let me tell you, some of those stories were pretty creepy. When we moved into our current apartment, John told me he didn't feel any strange energies there, and I was relieved. I didn't want to deal with anything spooky. But one thing about John that never changed was his tendency to talk in his sleep. And that's where things start to get really weird. In early December, we decided to visit my grandmother. I hadn't seen her in a while, and she lived about a 2 hour drive away from us. I knew it would be nice to catch up. And while we were there, I decided to show John something my dad had always told me about, a doll called Rebecca. Rebecca was a special doll that my grandma had kept for as long as I could remember. It was a plastic doll, about the size of a small child, with blonde hair and a blank, staring expression. Growing up, my dad would tell me all sorts of stories about Rebecca. He said that when he was a kid, Rebecca would move things around in the house when no one was there. Furniture would shift, things would be out of place. He told me these stories so many times that they almost became legend in our family. I had shared these stories with John, of course, and we'd laugh about them, never really taking them seriously. But as an adult, even though I didn't believe in all the spooky things my dad talked about, I had grown a bit of respect for Rebecca. I didn't think she was evil, but I didn't want to mess with her either. No need to provoke her. Just, be cautious. So, when we visited my grandma, I made sure to show John the infamous Rebecca doll. My grandma kept her in the corner of her bedroom, and we went in to take a look. Now, this is where things took an unexpected turn. Out of nowhere, John being John, decided to flip Rebecca's doll a bird. He wasn't being serious, of course, he was just messing around, thinking it was funny. But I instantly felt panic rising in me. I grabbed his arm and told him to apologize to Rebecca, just in case. John, of course, laughed it off. "It's just a doll, calm down," he said before leaving the room. I wasn't as calm as he was, though. I didn't want to be left alone in that room with Rebecca after what had just happened. I quickly followed John, and we didn't talk about the doll for the rest of the day. Honestly, I tried to forget about it. That night, we drove home, and when we got back, I didn't think much more about Rebecca. We were just tired from the trip and decided to go to bed around midnight. John, being a heavy sleeper, always falls asleep first, and I'm usually the one left trying to get comfortable. That night was no different. But then, as I was about to drift off, I felt John nudge me. He elbowed me gently, as though he were searching for me. "Jane," he called, several times. I thought he was just talking in his sleep, so I ignored him. But then he said something that sent a chill through me. "What are you doing?" he asked. I blinked, half asleep. "What do you mean?" I replied. "You're standing in the corner," he said, sounding confused. "Why are you staring at me?" At this point, I was wide awake. My heart started racing, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The room was pitch black, and there was no way either of us could see anything in the corners. My mind started racing. Was he just dreaming? Or was something actually in the corner of the room? "What do you mean?" "I'm laying next to you," I said, my voice shaking a little. John didn't respond immediately. Then, after a moment of silence, he finally said, "Oh, right, okay." And then he just fell silent, as if nothing had happened. I lay there, frozen, terrified. I grabbed my phone and shined the flashlight toward the corners of the room. There was nothing there. Of course, there was nothing there. But just the fact that John had felt something, or someone, was enough to keep me up for the rest of the night. "Oh, this is so." The next morning, when I told John about what had happened, he laughed it off. He apologized for ruining my sleep and told me he had no recollection of the conversation. At first, I thought he was just pranking me, trying to scare me. But John is a terrible liar. He's never been good at keeping a straight face, and I could tell he was being honest. He genuinely didn't remember a thing. When Christmas rolled around, we went back to my grandma's house. I decided to go into her bedroom to apologize to Rebecca on behalf of both John and myself. I didn't want any bad energy following us home. I figured it couldn't hurt. Since then, nothing strange has happened. But I can't shake the feeling that Rebecca somehow followed us home that night, and that it was her presence we felt in the room. Maybe she didn't like being disrespected. Or maybe she just wanted us to acknowledge her power. I don't know for sure, but I'll never forget that night, and I'll always respect Rebecca from now on. I have a story to share that still leaves me scratching my head, even though it happened a while ago. It all started when I bought my neighbor's house. He was an elderly man, and his wife had passed away some time before. She'd been in a nursing home, and shortly after I closed on the property and everything was transferred, my neighbor passed away as well. It wasn't long after that things started happening. Things I couldn't explain. At first, it was subtle. I began hearing footsteps coming up the stairs at night. Just soft, shuffling steps, as if someone was walking upstairs. It was strange, but I thought maybe it was just the house settling, or the wind making noise, or something like that. But then it started to escalate. I would hear weird noises coming from the kitchen. Sometimes it sounded like something falling, other times like banging, like pots and pans being knocked over, but nothing was ever out of place when I checked. There were occasional flickers of movement in other rooms, like black figures just walking through the spaces, and I'd hear things moving around when no one was there. At that point, I was really starting to feel uneasy. For my own peace of mind, I did what I thought would help. I set up cameras outside the house and inside a few rooms, mainly to detect motion in case someone had broken in. But the more time passed, the more I started to feel like I was living in a haunted house. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was around. To make myself feel a little better, I began leaving the hallway lights on upstairs. The soft glow would help calm my nerves, but it didn't really stop the odd occurrences. One night, I was laying in bed, sound asleep, when I suddenly woke up. I didn't open my eyes, but I could hear footsteps again, coming up the stairs. The glow from the hallway light shone through the crack under my door, and I could make out the shadow of someone's head hovering right over my face. My first thought was, oh great, it's my husband messing with me, trying to scare me. So I decided to scare him first. I took a deep breath and quickly opened my eyes, ready to catch him in the act. But what I saw made my blood run cold. Right in front of me, just inches away from my face, was a man's face. An older man with pale, white skin and deep, curious eyes. And it wasn't my husband. It couldn't have been. My husband is black. This man had features that were completely different. The hair was white, his face was wrinkled, and his expression was one of intense curiosity, like he was studying me. I can't even describe the shock I felt in that moment. It happened so fast. I slapped at him, thinking maybe I was dreaming or that my brain was playing tricks on me. But when I slapped, I felt nothing. No resistance, no warmth, no physical presence, nothing. It was like I had slapped air, but the face was still there, hovering inches from mine, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. And then just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, fading into thin air. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was dreaming or if I had truly seen a ghost. My heart was racing, and I jumped out of bed so fast that I nearly tripped over myself. I turned on all the lights in the room and rushed to check on my daughter, just to make sure everything was okay. When I walked into her room, she looked up at me sleepily and said, "I think Dad is home." Now, here's the kicker. My husband wasn't home. He had been at work the entire night. I don't know if it was some kind of strange psychic link between my daughter and the spirit, or if she had sensed something too, but it was as if she had known something had happened, even though she couldn't have. I laughed, nervous and unsure of what had just happened. I felt like I was losing my mind. I kept thinking, did that really happen? Was it just a dream? But no, it felt real. I could still see his face in my mind, clear as day. Since then, nothing else like that has happened. I haven't seen any more shadows, and the noises seem to have stopped. But I can't shake the feeling that there was something in that house. Something that wasn't quite human, but definitely curious. I never went back to sleep that night. I kept all the lights on and stayed up for hours, trying to wrap my head around what I had just experienced. To this day, I wonder if it was my neighbor, the elderly man who had passed away so shortly after I moved in. Maybe it was his spirit still wandering the house, or maybe just curious about the new people living there. I'll never know for sure. But one thing I do know is that I'll never forget the face that appeared in my bedroom that night. And after that, I made sure to keep the hallway lights on, just in case. This is a story that stayed with me for a long time. It's about a place called Worley Hospital, which used to stand in Pampa, Texas. The hospital has been closed for many years now, but the building still stands, a silent, eerie reminder of all the lives that once passed through its halls. Some of those lives, it seems, never left. And in the case of one particular group of paranormal investigators, this hospital would change their views on the afterlife forever. Worley Hospital was notorious for its strange happenings, and many people believed it was haunted. Paranormal investigation teams from all over came to try and uncover the truth behind the rumors. Some were convinced the hospital was just an old building with creaky floors and drafty hallways. But for one team, their experience there proved that something far more sinister, and perhaps even heartbreaking, lingered in the empty halls. Melanie, one of the investigators, shared her experience in hopes of shedding light on the spirits that still call Worley Hospital home. "I'd like to keep my group anonymous," Melanie began, speaking softly, almost hesitantly. "We didn't exactly get permission to investigate the place. We're not a big group, so we split up to cover more ground. I'm a mom, and I decided to check out the nursery and the children's ward. We're new to this, so we don't have fancy equipment like some of the bigger teams do. All I had was a night vision camera and an EVP recorder that we switched out every hour." As she continued, it became clear that this wasn't just another ghost story. "I walked into the nursery, and right away I started feeling these cold spots," she explained. "They weren't like a breeze or anything. They were isolated, like pockets of cold air that shouldn't have been there. I kept telling myself it was just a draft, but the longer I stayed, the more I started to think maybe there was something here." Melanie's voice grew more animated as she recalled the next part. "I moved through the nursery and into the children's ward. The floor was made of tile, and my footsteps echoed in the quiet. I thought if there were any ghosts here, they'd definitely know I was coming." Just then, something caught her attention. No more than 2 minutes later, I heard it, a door creaking behind me. Slowly, like someone had pushed it open just enough to make that eerie sound. It was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. I reached for my walkie-talkie, thinking maybe I should call for backup, when I heard a voice. A soft, quiet voice saying, "Help me." Melanie paused, her eyes darkening at the memory. I turned around, but there was no one there. It sounded like a little girl, but there was no pain in her voice, just a sense of longing. I spun back around, and that's when I saw her. Her voice dropped to a whisper. A little girl. She appeared right there in the hallway, clear as day. I was so shocked that I dropped my camera. "I still haven't fully paid it off," she added with a nervous laugh, as if trying to shake off the lingering fear. The girl was standing there in front of me, just watching me. She was wearing a frilly little dress, and her face was so sad. "Help me," she murmured again, and my heart just broke. My maternal instincts kicked in, and I couldn't just stand there. I had to do something. Melanie's eyes softened as she continued, her voice gentle. I asked her, "How can I help you?" And without hesitation, she said, "I lost my favorite doll." I didn't even think twice. I started searching through the rooms, looking for anything that could be her doll. The suspense in her voice grew as she described the moment. In the 5th room, I found it. A dusty old rag doll, sitting all alone in the corner of the room. I took it, walked back into the hallway, and handed it to the little girl. She paused, her voice trembling slightly as she relived the moment. The girl smiled so wide when I gave her the doll. She took it in her arms and said, "Now I'm not alone anymore." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. It was such a simple thing, but it meant so much to her. Melanie took a deep breath, collecting herself. I've spent a lot of time researching the history of the hospital, trying to figure out who the little girl was. I've gone through records from Pampa, but I haven't found anything. But what happened that night? That made me realize that not all spirits are here to harm us. Some of them are just looking for peace. And that little girl? I think she found hers that night. I've never shared this story with anyone except my mom. Not even my husband knows about it. It's one of those things that's too strange, too unsettling, and too personal to tell most people. I've only shared it on a private page where I know my other Facebook friends won't see it. Unless, of course, they're also part of the group. But today, I feel like it's time to share. So, here's the backstory. I've always suspected that my mom might have some kind of medium-like ability. It's not something we ever talk about, but there's been more than one occasion where I've wondered if she could sense things others can't. One experience in particular sticks out to me. Years ago, my mom and I decided to take a little weekend trip to a quaint Amish community. We rented a small remodeled cottage, one of those little painted lady houses that are so charming and cozy. The bedrooms were connected by open doorways leading into a shared bathroom. We were just about to go to bed after a long day of exploring when things got strange. I had a hard time falling asleep that night. It was well past 2 a.m., and I kept hearing the sound of horse hooves outside, pacing back and forth along the street in front of the house. It was weird because I couldn't figure out why anyone would be out at that hour. Amish people use horse drawn buggies, but why at 2 a.m.? It gave me the creeps, and every time I tried to drift off, the sound kept pulling me back into a state of unease. Then, just as I was starting to feel like I might finally fall asleep, I heard something that made my blood run cold. My mom, who was fast asleep in the bed next to me, suddenly murmured in a soft, whiny voice, "You heard me." Now, I know my mom doesn't joke around in her sleep. She's not the type to prank me or say things like that, especially in such a childlike way. I was wide awake, and I could hear her clearly, as though she were right next to me, speaking in that strange, whimpering tone. I froze, not knowing what to make of it. The next day, when I told her about it, she had no memory of it at all. She just laughed it off, not understanding why I was so freaked out. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. It wasn't just a random sleep talking moment. It felt like something else, something connected to the house, or maybe to her. I didn't know at the time, but I knew it had spooked me. Fast forward several years, and I was babysitting my 3-year-old nephew at my sister's house. One evening, he started acting terrified of his bedroom. He wouldn't go in, and when he would stand at the door, he'd lean way in, peering across the room, and then quickly hop back out. I asked him why he wouldn't go in there, and he said, because of the lady. Of course, I immediately got chills and asked him, what lady? He replied in his little voice, the lady with the nose. I don't know about you, but that freaked me out. The lady with the nose? It didn't make any sense to me. I tried to brush it off and distract him, but deep down it haunted me. Over the years, my nephew grew older, and eventually he switched bedrooms to the one next door. The lady with the nose story, however, never really left my mind. I always thought about it whenever I stayed the night there. One night, years later, my mom and I stayed in that room together. She went to sleep almost immediately, but I struggled. I kept thinking about that lady with the nose, the one my nephew had described. I don't know why, but I wondered, what if I felt a hand grab my arm? Without warning, just as the thought crossed my mind, my mother, who was fast asleep, started grabbing at my arm in her sleep. I couldn't believe it. I reacted instantly, pushing her hand away. But even as I moved her hand, she continued grabbing at me, as though something was pulling her to do it. I sat up in bed, scared out of my mind, and shouted, "Stop it." And then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. My mom, still asleep, never woke up. When I asked her about it the next morning, she had no memory of what happened. It was as if the whole thing had never occurred. But I remember it vividly, and the feeling of her hand gripping mine like that still sends a shiver down my spine. I've slept with my mom at various times over the years, but I've never experienced anything like this again, except for those 2 occasions. And it's made me wonder, could it be possible that ghosts can somehow occupy her person? That some spirit might be able to reach through her in her sleep and interact with me, or with someone else nearby. There's also something else about my mom that always struck me as strange. She can't wear one of those battery-powered watches because the battery goes haywire around her. She said several watches malfunction for no reason when she wears them, and I've often wondered if this could be connected to the strange experiences I've had with her. I don't know what it all means, but I do know that the experiences I've had with my mom, especially the ones where she's spoken or moved in her sleep in ways she can't remember, leave me with more questions than answers. I'm not sure if she's a medium or if something else is going on, but I can't deny that there's something very strange about the way things happen around her. And the lady with the nose? I'm still not sure what to make of it, but I won't forget it, and I don't think my nephew ever will either.